They will push out their less best troops out front. They will not their crack troops out front to draw fire, to identify positions, and they will try to push them up as far as they can, pin the Ukrainians down. And as I said, you will have people among them that will be artillery spotters and things like that, so that Russian artillery can call in. But those initial line are cannon fodder, basically. They're pushed out. It's cynical. It's cold-blooded. It's what the Russians have. Usually pretty early, any tanks or fighting vehicles are knocked out, meaning they will go often without tank and fighting vehicle support. And they fall in the hundreds or thousands.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio. I'm James Hansen, and today we're talking about the war in Ukraine, and I'm delighted to be joined again by Peter Zwack, a retired brigadier general who served for 34 years in the US Army as an intelligence officer before becoming the US's senior defense attaché to the Russian Federation between 2012 and 2014. Peter also authored the book Swimming the Volga, about his experience of living and studying in Russia at the end of the Cold War. Peter, always a pleasure. Welcome back to Frontline.
Thank you for having me, James.
In the last few days, Vladimir Putin has signed a decree increasing Russian troop numbers by 15%, meaning an extra 170,000 personnel. What do you make of that? And is that a sign of the ongoing high Russian casualty rate? We know that NATO estimate that the Russian casualty rate to be around 300,000.
Yes, I think it certainly is that. The Minister of Defense has said he wants the army to grow out to 1.5 million. You have this 170,000 soldier, or excuse me, they call troops, call out, and they haven't specified how it's going to be done by draft, conscripts, or volunteers. They're saying, I think right now, volunteers, meaning and recruits, which, you know, I don't know how well that will play in Russia. They did it again. You know, they had the first one about 130,000 last year. So it shows, I think, that the Russians are they have suffered serious human and material casualty and losses. And they're going to sustain this war. At least that's Putin's intent. It's a grind. It's a charnel house for all sides, Ukrainians too, but especially for Russia, as we're seeing now at Avdiivka, which is sort of the new Bakhmut. So yes, and then what we noticed the intent to encourage Russian women to have 8 children. And last year, a decree that, they get 10 children, they're going to get a hero badge for Russia to do that. And that is not just indicative of manpower losses, but that's the whole shrinking aspect of Russian demography that UN and other estimates have it in the next generation being 5 to 10% lower than what it is today. So yes, it's a big deal. The hardest challenge is they have this statement of intent. The war, Russians have improved. One has to say that militarily, but by not that much. And the word has to be out already now all over. It's been almost 2 years, James, that this war is awful, especially if you're a Russian frontline troop in a muddy trench or foxhole somewhere along the Donetsk. And now it's winter. And they're going to be feeling that pain. Also, And finally, most of these troops, as we've seen through all kinds of real and anecdotal reporting, they don't want to be there. They're not motivated. And it's one thing to be in an awful situation. It's a little better when you're motivated. But if you're not, you're down to, you've devolved to, fighting to survive for yourself, your buddy next door. And the next thing you're fighting is from freezing to death. So there's a lot to unpack. Again, long answer, but yes, another another major manpower push. Of course, they're having challenges. Last point on this: how and where do they pull these recruits? They've been going and continuously to the well in Tatarstan and Buryatia and a lot of the Russian more ethnic republics and oblasts, and avoiding or minimizing trying to pull soldiers in from the big cities like Moscow, St. Petersburg, Yekaterinburg, because that gets at the heart of the Russians and makes whatever's left of the middle class even more worried. So a lot to unpack with it. Bottom line again, they are calling up more soldiers because they need more soldiers. This will bring them out to a military of about 2.2 million with everything in aggregate.
And fundamentally, Peter, is that really the one card Vladimir Putin has left? He has a numerical advantage because of the relative size of the Russian population compared to the Ukrainian population. And Vladimir Putin, being the monster he is, doesn't mind racking up a massive casualty rate, doesn't mind using Russian soldiers as cannon fodder, because in his mindset, maybe his best option is to wait this thing out and to drag it out as long as possible.
James, I think you have a point there. I think that it seems the way the Ukrainians look at their forces and their people, just the perception that lives are perceived as more precious. It is a smaller population. Ukraine is not small. I mean, they can put hundreds of thousands, even low millions into the field, but it is a grind, and the attrition is there. While it seems that the Russians, starting with Putin, intellectually they care, but they really know our strength, is your point, is that we're just going to throw waves and waves and waves, and we're going to better equip them again after everything getting lost last year, and just keep the pressure on the grinding attritional pressure on the Ukrainians in the hope that the Ukrainians will settle for some type of negotiations or break. Now, the risk to the Russians, and it's hard to believe it was just 6 months ago when this warlord Prigozhin did his crazy march to Moscow, and 4 months ago when his airplane blew up and he was likely assassinated. And I remind viewers, listeners, that something like that happening, and especially where he was pretty well received by fairly senior members in the military and did not meet much resistance in the beginning, says something underneath all this is not right in the Russian body politic and in the Russian, if you will, military. I would just say in the military. And I think the lower you go down in the rank, junior, middle grade officers, they're doing the best they can, but first to survive. Let's wait this out. They are patriotic Russians, all right? I mean, they will, but they didn't bank for this. But when we talk a lot about new Ukrainian veterans being made, combat, those that survived, you now have more Russian combat veterans.
And do you think, mentioning Prigozhin, do you think that's almost a reminder that Putin will be constantly paranoid about new emerging threats, particularly moving into 2024, being an election year for him. And of course, no one's in any doubt as to what the outcome of that will be, but he does care about how that is viewed, about the presentation of that. And it was interesting you mentioned there, Peter, about how it's unlikely that they'll try and bring in any more troops from the big cities because they're worried about middle class opinion in Russia. Do you think Putin's a bit paranoid about a sudden shift in public opinion?
Oh, I think that there's an aspect of his regime. I think totalitarian regimes always are looking over their shoulder, and I mean they're coming down hard right now on media again and LBGQ. I mean all kinds of, I mean authoritarian stuff. I mean the state is becoming more and more of I almost use the word totalitarian pressure cooker. And these states, while seemingly powerful and resilient, are brittle. And you don't know where the cracks in the facades are. I think the cracks are already there. We saw that with Brig, I think the war, and you don't know how it'll manifest itself. And I think the only thing that's predictable about the Russians is the unpredictable, and that there will be in the future, both black and white swans out there. And what we need to do, our collective, our free-minded world, which your nation and my nation is a part of, is just and with all the competing, buffeting influences and agendas, just stick with our support, with our allies, with our support to Ukraine, and also help to try to manage Israel and the world out of this dreadful situation in Gaza, Palestine, that is influencing and could even further influence the campaign, the struggle in Ukraine.
And just turning to the situation on the front line at the moment in Ukraine, Peter, according to Ukraine, Russia is increasingly using remote strikes from KAB glide bombs because FAB glide bombs require Russian aircraft to fly within range of Ukrainian air defences, and so hence why they're using the KAB glide bombs instead. What will Ukraine need in return to deal with that?
Well, I think that first and foremost, they need to be able to reach out. They need always more air defense and middle and long range air defense. And while they have it and they've done well with it, their stocks, reportedly have been running low, so that's very, very important. And then the counter. The positioning of these things more up close, that's where you have the HIMARS systems, Storm Shadow, the British piece, ATACMS that has come in. The Ukrainians need to be able to reach out and hit these concentrations where they can find these launch sites and launch complexes to do it. In the air, I think most of the ordnance that's fired by Russian aircraft, MiG-31s and bombers, are usually over Russian airspace or over the Black Sea. They don't get in deep over Ukraine. So that in that sense, only long-range air defense could reach them. We're talking about the F-16s and all this new ordnance coming in. That will help a lot over the battlefront. But it will be a significant improvement, but it won't necessarily change the aspect of the war. Troublingly, of course, the Russian, their military industrial complex has geared up, and they are slowly, working to put more weapons, tanks, airplanes into the field, though that's going to take time. But yes, the long range drones and all of that the Russians are flying are, the Ukrainians ideally need to be able to locate the launch sites, but now some of them are so small that it's hard to actually find specifically where they are. Is the same with the Ukrainian drones. And James, the drones, and I've been around in the military, on and off for over 40 years now. And this is, we had all thought that our armor and tanks were coming back after these wars of insurgency. And they have, but this drone UAV piece with ordnance and surveillance they're cheap, they're easy to produce, relatively easy to fly. You can arm them, you can manage them from the ground. Now you see all these counter drone electronic warfare technologies. So there's a whole new spectrum in that, and the Ukrainians are better, but the Russians are catching up. And then, of course, you have the Iranians that are sending their Shahed drones up across the Caspian Sea, up to Dagestan, and then they come over. And so Russia's supply chain, basically with Iran, which is odd, Korean artillery weapons, which is, you would never imagine it, but also a lot of Chinese type semiconductors and chips allow them to build, if you will, like their Lancet, the relatively new Lancet drone, small, light, but capable, that are pretty dangerous suicide drones. Whole new spectrum of war. Tanks are important. They can get there. They back the infantry. They can help hold ground. But in an unopen, managed battle space, they've become quite vulnerable.
Would you say, Peter, that Ukraine still has an advantage when it comes to drone operations, even though I hear what you say about Russia investing and improving their drone operations? Because I know at the start of the conflict, there was a lot of talk about how, yes, Russia had some quite expensive advanced UAVs, but actually, because they're expensive to use, it didn't make that much operational sense to use so many, whereas the Ukrainians were having success with these commercial modified drones that were far cheaper and in many respects just as effective.
Well, that's right. I mean, the Orlan drone, pretty good drone, but quite expensive, and a number of them have been knocked down. No, what I think we have all marveled at, and I'll use that word. Now, they've had a lot of help, but a lot of it is homegrown, is their ability to assimilate and adapt technology. Now, there's nothing more motivating and focusing than being a nation in existential peril. So you have, the strength that they had a good science aspect, technology aspect going in, but you have a lot of smart youth using these, young technologies, if you will, and doing marvelously. And again, this is a societal war for Ukraine, and it's in a way that's difficult to really explain as a thing, but as a feeling. And they're fighting everything from when I was in Ukraine 4 months ago to a very modest Ukrainian waitress I saw in a restaurant 2 nights ago in Rhode Island here. And I found out that she was Ukrainian. I don't speak Ukrainian. I asked if I could speak to her in Russian, understanding it. She said, "No, I'd rather speak Ukrainian or English." Meaning she was a proud young Ukrainian here in the United States, had left Kharkiv area 6 months ago, and proud Ukrainian, and in the current sense wants nothing to do with Russia and their culture.
I want to ask you, Peter, about the latest around Avdiivka and also Kupiansk. I mean, you mentioned earlier how Avdiivka has almost become, in a way, the new Bakhmut because it's become so symbolically important, particularly for Putin. He's said to be putting thousands of new troops and heavy artillery into new offensives around those two cities, and also using so-called wave tactics. Can you just explain a bit more about how that works in practice on the ground?
The human wave tactics. Well, yeah, and I think I don't know how to describe that. There may be some exaggeration in it, meaning I wouldn't, I don't, they're not going to line up shoulder to shoulder and charge across the field like in World War One. But clearly, it seems that they will push out. They'll do a recce, but they will push out their less best troops out front. They will not their crack troops out front to draw fire, to identify positions, and they will try to push them up as far as they can, pin the Ukrainians down. And as I said, you will have people among them that will be artillery spotters and things like that, so that Russian artillery can call in. But those initial line are cannon fodder, basically. They're pushed out. It's cynical. It's cold-blooded. It's what the Russians have. Usually pretty early, any tanks or fighting vehicles are knocked out, meaning they will go often without tank and fighting vehicle support. And they fall in the hundreds or thousands. Then you have other units, better units, however you define better. Certain line units, airborne units, naval infantry, that will then try to push and exploit the openings or the seams that the forward wave or waves had sacrificed them for. And again, they are calling in artillery throughout the process. Ideally, those sacrificed have been able to really help geoposition that. Plus, there are drones up in the air. There's a whole nother fight going on there's an air defense fight. Ukrainians are trying to keep Russian fast movers, meaning fighter bombers and helicopters, from hitting them over the line. Russian helicopters are dangerous, and while they've lost a bunch, they have knocked out a lot of Ukrainian stuff. So you have that, and of course you have the drone battle that's going on over the head of these infantrymen. And we've all seen on YouTube and on Twitter and X and all of that, these pictures of these soldiers looking up, and the drone has it, has them acquired. So it's bloody, it's grueling, it's expensive, and a lot of these dead never come home, never get military honors. Many of them come from places, as I said, other than Moscow, Rostov, St. Petersburg. They come from the more rural areas. And I just wonder how much longer, a little bit like toward the mid-end of World War One, how long they will, take it. And is there a point where their leadership, their middle-level officers that are in the middle and see it, basically turn on their leadership and either, or stop, mutiny, or something worse.
I just want to look ahead to the winter months, Peter. Obviously, last year we saw Russia with a very deliberate strategy of targeting some of the energy infrastructure, in particular around Kyiv. Are you expecting a repeat of that this year? And how would you assess Ukraine's preparedness for that?
Yes. Again, great question. Absolutely. We're seeing it already. And the Ukrainians have a year of experience. Europe has a year of experience, but so much of that comes to the continuing ability of the Ukrainians to knock down those cruise missiles and drones, and they've proven that they can, and also how they have. In the last 9 months, diversified and created alternate paths and alternative pipelines and even alternate energy sources. So Ukrainians are fully aware and will, air defense is huge. Both air defense and being able to defend the skies with aircraft would be especially important for this fight. They pulled it off. Now, Europe, United States, just got to continue to help them any which way we can in the winter months. We did that last. We basically Europe weaned a good percentage of its needs from Russian natural gas and oil as a result of that, which is a strategic Russian blunder. And everybody is aware about the need to help the Ukrainians stay heated. I think they will battle through. We were lucky last winter. It was a relatively warm winter. The good news is that a lot of warm clothing is coming in from donor nations, but the fuel and would be in the winter the number one Russian strategic objective, as it was last year. I think they will be partially successful, but everybody is aware of it, and we're just going to have to see what happens.
Just finally, Peter, I wanted to ask you about Ukrainian officials who've recently appealed to international organisations to investigate video footage published over the weekend showing Russian forces killing 2 surrendering and apparently unarmed Ukrainian soldiers, which could, of course, be a violation of the Geneva Convention. I mean, we've already spoken about how Putin is using increasingly desperate tactics in terms of cannon fodder, essentially, of Russian troops doing human wave tactics around Avdiivka. This, again, I suppose, speaks to his desperation. I mean, do you think we will ever see a day where Putin is in the dock and held accountable for his actions?
Only day that will happen is if the regime turns in on itself. A war like this, with the breadth and viciousness of the worst we saw in World War II, you're always, tragically, even among the good guys, going to get atrocities. It's just the nature of the beast. But it's systemic on the Russian side, seemingly. It seems to be, maybe, I don't know if it's encouraged, but certainly tolerated. We had it in Bucha and Irpin, and I was there earlier this year. I mean, yeah, the occupying troops were basically set loose on the population of those places. The war crimes tribunals succeed when the other side breaks apart, or the country turns over the criminals to that. But what it is important for, James, it's a knock on the shoulder, and we see you as this. They'll deny. As you notice, Putin will not travel diplomatically anywhere that could in any way create a problem for him legally. There are a few countries he will go to where he knows he's safe. So it's out there. Now, you could take the flip side that makes them even more determined. That they, the only safe place to be is in the Kremlin, or something like that. And so it's good and important that the moral stand has been taken. There is a precedent with Nuremberg, and there is a precedent after Yugoslavia. So they're on notice. Their work, and it has happened. But right now it is a It's a tag. And now anybody associated with that, it makes business harder and everything that goes with that.
Peter, we always appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us today on Frontline.
Hopefully that worked. And you just take care and really warm best our British friends and allies for the holidays.
Thank you for watching this episode of Frontline for Times Radio. For more on the war in Ukraine, subscribe to the Times Radio YouTube channel. Listen to Times Radio on your digital radio, or you can read the Times online with your digital subscription or in print. Thank you and goodbye.